Hello everyone, welcome to this IRIS webinar. My name is Pierrick Delez. I'm Marketing Director at IRIS PNT. Today, my colleague Bart Ballegeer will tell you a story about HR document flow automation. But first, I would like to start with some practicalities. This session will be approximately 45 minutes. During the webinar, you will be able to ask questions via the question tab on the right-hand side of your screen. And there will be a Q&A session after Bart's presentation at the end. Any question that will be unanswered will be answered later by us personally. We will get back to you personally to answer all your questions, of course. And also the slide deck and the replays or the recording of this session will be made available tomorrow on our website. So don't need to take any screenshots, you will get everything. Okay, I think we are all set and I see that we have more than 300 people online for this session, so that's great. Bart, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pierrick. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or good morning, good evening, depending from where you are. Because if I understood well, Pierrick, we have guests from all over the world participating in this webinar, and this is really, really cool. Before we start, I make the assumption that everybody knows who is IRIS. And for those who don't, very briefly, IRIS is founded 32 years ago with a focus on data capture. And 32 years ago, data capture was primarily OCR technology. Today, we still talk about data capture, but we talk about advanced classification. We talk about advanced indexation based on artificial intelligence, based on robotic processing. A lot of expensive words just to say that we automatically read documents regardless the source. We still handle paper, of course, but more and more we handle only electronic document streams. We read them and we deliver them as structured data wherever you need information. Now, from technology point of view, we can structure any kind of document, orders, invoices, driver's license, you name it. But from business point of view, this is different. You can't automate a document if you don't understand the background behind. I guess you agree with me. So it is the combination of technology together with the knowledge of a certain process, which makes you an expert. We deliver technology, our partners, you have the market expertise, and together we are the experts. Today, I'd like to share with you a project handling HR documents. It's the story of one of our customers, Connexxion. Connexxion migrated in 2016 from a paper-based HR administration to a digital HR environment. My name is Bart Ballegeer. I'm the head of business development for the region Southwest Europe. And the picture that you see here on the slide is definitely from before the Corona period when we still had barbershops. I'm located in Belgium. I'm reporting in Germany and active all over Europe. I have a technical background. I've studied electronics and robotics. And my dream at the time was to become a PLC programmer. Apparently, somewhere on the road it went wrong. I guess I'm better in explaining than doing it. I started my career with maintaining servers and networks. I'm talking about Token Ring, about coax networks, if you would like to know how old I am. And further, I worked as a developer, a solution architect, a project manager, account manager, always in the area of communications and digital transformation, and from which almost 10 years now for IRIS. And as you can see, Pierrick, I am still smiling. I really love to work for IRIS and I love my job. But you're here for the business case. I will explain a little bit who is Connexxion, give you the background of the HR project, finally the solution that we deliver together, how Connexxion handled the rollout of the solution, and at the end we have a Q&A session. So let's start. Connexxion is the largest player in passenger transport in the Netherlands. They have about 4,000 taxis, 3,000 city buses, some trains, ferries, ambulances, trams. And most of their employees obviously are behind the wheel of a vehicle. In total, if we talk about the employees, management, and all the service layers, we talk about 14,000 people in total. It's not the largest organization, but it's definitely not the smallest one. Now, those 14,000 employees, they are working all across the Netherlands, all over 115 different sites. And some sites are just taxi waiting places where there are no computers, even no electricity. The HR department itself is centralized in Boskoop in the Netherlands. And from there, they process about around 1,000 documents a day, approximately. And those documents can go from curriculums to contracts to medical exams to wage garnishments. In total, they process 130 different document types. Now, let's see how they do this, processing the document flow. And the best thing to do this is by an example. Imagine that you are hired as a taxi driver. Well, in that case, there is someone at the HR department who drafts a contract for you and who will mail it physically to your manager who is situated on one of those 150 sites. And your manager will receive it, will give it to you so you can read it, you can sign it. You will give it back to your manager. You guess already the rest of the story. He will mail it back physically again to the HR department. And at the HR, they take a box and they put the contract inside this box. And from now on, you have your own personal HR file at Connexxion. Great. You see immediately that there is a lot of space for improvement in this process. The process is long, expensive, and time to time, some documents are lost where even nobody is aware that we have lost documents. So from a sales perspective, if you were in my shoes, you would say, well, these are the kind of processes where we are looking for. They are easy to optimize. We have a very high ROI, and the sales cycle is easy. I guess you agree. But the reality is not always so easy. And that was the same at Connexxion. And it's not that Connexxion was blind for innovation. No, we didn't need to convince them, for instance, of the advantages of a digital HR file. It is easy accessible, it's easy to retrieve information, documents, you can manage retention time, expenses, holidays. They were already convinced. And the nice thing was that the payroll application that Connexxion was using, Avas Profit, had a built-in digital HR file. So everything was already there right at their fingertips. Connexxion implemented a digital HR file next to the physical box. They kept the physical box. And the only question was how to get the document inside Avas. And we don't talk alone, we don't talk only about this document, but there is still the existing paper archive. Well, the HR employees at Connexxion, with a lot of courage, they started manually to scan all the documents and to manual encode all the metadata necessary within Avas to put it in Avas. And the first thing that they noticed is that they weren't even able to handle the daily stream, those 1,000 documents a day. So they had to hire additional people or to outsource it. And that's the decision they took. Partially, they did it on their own with the existing people. Partially, they outsourced the scanning of the documents, which was, of course, for them an additional operational cost which wasn't foreseen. So one of the lessons that Connexxion learned very early is that it's not the implementation of a digital HR file which is the challenge, but how you're going to feed the system in an efficient way. And remember the initial process that I explained, this process was still in place. Digital transformation was only introduced on the level of HR. So I can hear you thinking now, well, it's quite easy. Give everyone a scanner and let them scan directly into the HR file. No more physical mailings, no more delays. You take away the pressure of HR. It's easy and it's simple. But Connexxion didn't do that. In fact, they just took peace with how it was organized and how obvious it looks to automate the data capture and the routing process to optimize everything. All the involved parties were against it. As a starter, you had the people managers. They were used to the delays. They were used to the physical posting, to the risk of losing documents. They didn't consider this as an issue, at least not an issue big enough to take additional workload, because that was their fear. HR is overloaded, so the easy solution of HR is we will delegate everything to other people. And then you had the HR department itself. They were doing everything manually, but by doing so, they had every paper in their hands and they were in full control. And they were afraid to give away the control. So neither the people managers, neither HR was interested to automate further. Although at the end, they went for a full automation, but it was not a sales guy like me who convinced Connexxion for this. No, it was the result of an external audit. And the result of this audit was that Connexxion did everything as it should be on paper, but they were not able to prove that reality matched the theory, especially towards confidentiality, which is very important if you talk about HR. Connexxion wasn't able to tell or to prove who had access to which document. So in 2015, Connexxion decided to write an RFP for their digital HR document flow. And like we see very often, the tender was written from the user's perspective, which is of course a good thing and logic, but often for us suppliers of solutions, very open for interpretation. There was a tender of 90 pages, and if I have to narrow down what's in, then we received a request to scan documents on 160 different locations, from which some didn't have electricity or network, to store them into AVAs automatically with the right document type and metadata, with an approval functionality, and of course with strong security and an audit trail along. There was also a list of 200 questions in the RFP. Questions like, can your solution scan plastic ID cards? Can you scan passports? How do you handle no network available, no electricity? But what was not mentioned in those 90 pages is what means automatically. And as you see immediately, there is a lot of space for interpretation. We, that means Iris together with Canon Netherlands, because it was Canon Netherlands who did the integration at Connexxion, we decided to go for a full automated solution, as we thought, which was the idea behind the RFP. And we used for this Iris extract with the Xclassify engine, but I will explain the solution a little bit later. The fact is that Connexxion received 5 totally different answers with 5 totally different prices. Edna van Laar, who was the responsible project manager at Connexxion, she told me afterwards that from all the answers that she received, also our one, most parts were not very clear for her. So what she did is she decided to go for the cheapest solution, which ticked all the boxes in the questionnaire. And the solution that she has chosen was a solution which scanned documents manually. From there, they were routed for validation and to AVAS. But our competitors, let's call them the other, they interpreted automatically only as automatically routing and integration of AVAS. They ignored completely the indexation and the classification part. Well, they didn't completely ignore it. They added the functionality for reading barcodes. So what they said is that if Connexxion was able to put a barcode on the document with the document type and the metadata, well, then they were able to automatically read this document. Logically, our full automated solution was not in the same price list. And lucky for us, Erna van Laar was intrigued by the price difference. Why were there two solutions which both ticked all the boxes? So for her, it were two equal solutions. And was there such a big difference in price? So what she did is she invited us and the other to give a presentation and a demonstration of the solution that we presented. And after this presentation, it was very clear that one, like I already mentioned, the tender was open for interpretation, but two, that the tender was written without knowing what is technical possible. And if you don't know what exists, then you don't ask for it. Now, to make a long story short, at the end, Connexxion rewrote the tender and there was a second tender. And this tender was, that's perhaps the fault of us sales, because we are very good in explaining all the possibilities of digital transformation. This new tender was the request for a state-of-the-art technical solution, full option, but no longer really in line with the real needs of Connexxion. So after we received the second tender, what we had to do was to set the scope again, and this time we did it together with Connexxion. And later, they told us that they really appreciated and needed our guidance in this process. It's beside, of course, the high automation grade and the excellent balance between cost and profit. It was thanks to our expertise, which we have proven during these workshops, that we won finally the new tender. The challenge remained the same. There were still 1,000 documents to capture, over 150 sites, paper documents, but also electronic documents. We had to retrieve the document type, we had to retrieve the relevant metadata, have an approval workflow, and send everything to AVAS, profit behind. But what we've seen is that all the different involved parties had their own specific requirements. The sponsor of the project, which was the HR department, well, for them, what was important, they wanted to get rid of the document loss. That was a first thing. They also wanted to transfer the responsibility from the HR department to the local people managers, but not with losing the control. So in certain cases, they still wanted to have the ability to have an additional approval by HR. For instance, if there was a new contract, they didn't want to have a people manager just hiring someone without the agreement of HR, which makes sense. And then most important, of course, because this was where everything started, they wanted to have an audit trail so that they clearly knew from the beginning that an electronic document was received or a paper document was scanned until it was in AVAS, who have seen the document and what was the road that the document had made within the company. And next to the HR, you have the people managers, the business, who had to work with the solution. And they say, okay, no problem. but we want to have it as automated as possible because we don't want to have additional manual labor on top of it. And also it has to be very easy to handle. The administration will be done most of the time by drivers. Sometimes it will be a taxi driver in between two trips. He has to do from his car some administration. So it had to be very, very easy and fast. They also wanted to have guarantees that the confidentiality was okay, especially when the responsibility was handed over to them. If they did something, they wanted to verify that everything was okay, so it had to be real time instead of waiting 4 days with the old process. And as some sites even didn't have network and computer, they wanted to be able to work from their mobile phone if possible. And a third party in this process was the IT, because it's an IT project. For IT, it was clear that it was a local deployment because you needed to have a scanner, but they wanted to be able to central manage it. They didn't want to go to every of those 150 sites to do support and to do the installation behind. Otherwise, they were also a little bit concerned about the bandwidth usage, especially as some sites were connected at the time over 3G networks. And then you had some, classic requirements coming from IT, like platform independent, secure end-to-end, and user management via the Active Directory. Now, one of the most difficult discussions, the longest discussions that we had within setting the scope was what is the metadata which was needed. It was quite easy. The RFP said you need to put metadata into AVAS, but they didn't really mention what metadata. This was a very difficult discussion where we at IRIS, we took more the role of moderator. We just explained the impact of each decision. And basically, HR and the senior management, they wanted to have as much metadata as possible, which is logic because it's handy to retrieve documents, to make statistics, to automate some workflows. But the users, they wanted to have as less metadata as possible, because for them it was very clear that everything you put on top will bring additional workload for them. So they wanted to have as less as possible. Finally, we agreed on a universal set of metadata for every document. We first had the employee, then we had the document date, and finally we had the document type, which was divided in a document category and a subcategory. And these were the indexes for all document types. We made 2 exceptions, and that's when we recognize the document as a driver's license or as a medical certificate. We needed on top of the document date an additional date, which was the expiry date. And that was for them very important to have a follow-up on those documents. Imagine that you are sitting in a bus in Amsterdam and the driver has no valid driver's license. Now, how did we retrieve this information? So first of all, there are different types of documents. And one of the document types they have are their own document types, where they are in control on how they were created. And we asked them if it was possible to put a barcode on this document, which was for some documents possible, for others not. But for those where it was possible, they just added a QR code on the document. And based on this QR code, we were able to retrieve all the information. For those where it was not possible to have the QR code, well, because Connexxion made the documents, we know the layout, the graphical structure of the document, and we knew exactly on which position we had to look for which data. And there we used something which we call forms processing. On specific locations, we were looking for the employee, the document type, and the document category behind. For all the other documents, well, to retrieve the employee, we did a challenge towards the HR database of Connexxion. And we took every word on the document and we tried to see if we have a match. If we have a match on, first of all, the employee BSN number. BSN, that's the Burger Service number. You can compare it with the National Security number. So if we could find this National Security number on a document and inside the database of HR, then we knew, okay, this is the employee. If we were not able to have this match, then we just did a second challenge based on the internal employee ID. And if this was not working, we did another challenge based on the name. And like this, we were able to read the employee independently from where on the document it was written. So this is for the employee. The date, a date is easy to retrieve because it has a certain format and a very unique format for a date. So reading dates is not an issue, but what makes it a challenge is to know which date we found. Because if you have an invoice, for instance, that's quite easy. There's often a label saying this is the invoice date, this is the due date. But within HR documents, often there is not a label. You have just a letter and there is a date on it. So what we did is, first of all, we collected all the dates on the documents, and then we used a filter. We filtered out all the dates in the future, because logically the document date can't be in the future. And we did the same for the past. We filtered out all the documents which were older than, all the dates which were older than 3 months. And at the end, if we were able to narrow it down to only one date, great, we found the document date. If we still had multiple dates, then we created a short list for the user, and the user could just pick which is the correct date. And finally, for the document category, we are using the iris extract classification module. And to do classification, again, you have 3 different types of document classes. You have those where you have the barcode, easy, I already explained. Then you have documents which always have the same layout. And then you have documents where you always have different layouts. To be honest, you're not in control of the document and you don't know what you will receive. And normally, if you should do a classification project, the first thing that you do is you start to build rules to define which document do I have in front of me. For instance, this document measures 8.5 centimeters by 5.4 centimeters. There are 12 digits at the bottom, and I find the words Belgium and identity card at the top. Well, you can say this is a Belgium ID card. And like this, you create rules for all the different document types you have. You see the weak spots of this approach, especially if you have like Connexxion 130 different document types. It's very time consuming to configure all those rules. And once we created them, let's cross the fingers that the document doesn't change. And then we still have the documents where we don't know how they look. So how are we going to create rules behind? And perhaps another remark important to know is that sometimes the customer and sometimes we, based on the samples that we receive, we think that the document has always the same layout, but the reality is not always like it is in theory. So sometimes where we think that we start with documents which have always the same layout, the layout still changes. Now, to avoid all those issues, we use at Iris another approach. We have our Xclassify engine. And Xclassify is using the principle of artificial intelligence. It's a simple concept. You have to feed Xclassify with, let's say, 100 samples for each document type. And feeding means you make on the server a directory for each document type and you save some sample files in it. And that's it. And what Iris Extract will do is it will analyze all the samples that you provided. And based on this, based on the words which are used, based on the layout, the graphical structure, it will create for you an engine ready to use in 30 minutes. So no longer manually defining all the rules, you will have it there all automatically created by Xclassify. And you're ready to go in production. Now, when you're in production, you will see that you will have a certain grade of automation. Certain number will be automatically classified. Some extract will still not know which document type it is, which makes sense because we only used 100 samples. And each time there is a doubt, well, there's an operator who will need to confirm the document type. But what is really cool is that by doing this, by manually confirming the document type, we feed the engine with new samples and we make the engine more intelligent for the future. So you will see by using the solution, the automation grades will go up and up and up to a certain point where we reached the maximum. And at this point, if necessary, there is still the option to add some additional rules to do the fine tuning. But we are no longer defining from scratch the rules for 130 document types. We only define rules just to do the latest fine tuning to get the best result out of it. So the technology of Iris, which was used by Connexxion, is of course this Xclassify engine. We also used free-form indexation to retrieve the employee and the document date. We used forms processing for the internal documents where there was no barcode on it, and of course the barcode readers. We also used IHQC. IHQC stands for Intelligent High Quality Compression. It is the PDF compression of Iris. And we use this compression to reduce the document size, and by reduce the usage of the bandwidth. And just to give you an example, a classic document, 300 dpi color, which takes normally roughly about 1 megabyte, will be now 60 to 70 kilobytes. So you see that it's a huge saving on bandwidth. And we were used to use 3G networks to transfer images from the local sites to the central computer. IHQC, besides IHQC, we also used something which is called Xmail Fetcher. Xmail Fetcher imports automatically emails and throws it in the flow to process it. And of course, we have Iris Power Scan, which was used as scan client to scan the paper documents. The document routing and the flow, which was also a part of the tender, was controlled by Iris Extract. And for this document flow, what we have the 3 different locations. We have the ICT data center in Hilversum, where they installed our central solution. You have the operational side from where the people managers were working. And then we had the centralized HR administration in Boskop. And everything starts at the operational side. If we take now the flow of a paper document. So every document was locally scanned using PowerScan by a people manager, in reality by one of the employees working for that department. And we did scan, we did the separation, created a digital file, we did the compression directly, and we also added a digital signature, which was again important later on if we talk about audit trails and proving who had access to which document and the authenticity of the document. From there, the document was routed to our central server, where we did the classification and where we did the indexation. And in the initial blueprint, from there, it had to be routed to the employee's manager for validation. So here we had a problem. A problem in a way that, imagine you have the document of Bart Balaguer and the manager of Bart Balaguer is Pierrick. So we would route it to Pierrick. But imagine that the solution was not able to identify Bart Balaguer as the employee, or even worse, he found someone else. In that case, the document would be routed to the wrong manager for validation. One, the flow is wrong, but much more important is towards confidentiality. Someone normally who don't have access to this document will get the document in front of his eyes. So this was something which was absolutely a no-go for Connexxion. They wanted to be absolutely 100% sure if we talk about confidentiality. So the only solution we found to be absolutely sure that we route the document to the right person is to offer it for a first validation to the person who had already the documents in their hand. And that's the person who scanned the documents, which is quite easy because we knew who was behind the scanner. So from Iris Extract, we routed it back to a validation to the user who did the scanning. The only thing that he had to validate was the employee. And once the employee was manually verified, we knew 100% sure who was the first line manager, and this manager get the document for an additional approval. And from here in the flow, it depends a little bit what kind of document we had. If it was an ordinary document, the document could be added directly to the HR file into AVAS. If it was an important document, then it had to be routed over HR for an additional approval. So in the final flow, we talk about 2 approvals, up to 3, depending on the document type. How does this look for the user? Well, here you see some samples. This is a print screen of a user who is going to check what he has to validate, and obviously this user has a lot of work to do. That's because it's a test account over here. And once he selects a document to validate, you will see the document like this with all the metadata, which is now in red, and some cases are empty. That's again, this is a live example based on confidentiality. We deleted some metadata behind. But this was the solution finally that we created or that we created together at Connexxion. Now, by having the solution, that doesn't mean yet that it's in production. First of all, there is a logistic issue. Every site needed to have a PC, every site needed to have Iris Power Scan and a scanner. And of course, there's a second challenge. The users needed to be trained on how to use. And here you see that Connexxion is used to handle such kind of rollouts. First of all, Connexxion reorganized with the way how they handled those 150 sites. So from those 150, they defined 60 sites as administrative centers, which made it much easier. We no longer needed to worry about the electricity, the network, and on the level of licenses, this was better as well for Connexxion, obviously. And they did everything according to the book. They wrote a user manual, they wrote a technical manual for the IT support. They installed first 2 pilot sites to collect feedback and to implement the feedback of those users. And for the big rollout, well, for the big rollout, IT prepared for every site a new PC and scanner. It was better for them to have everything new instead of just installing it on existing infrastructure, not knowing what will happen, if it will work, etc. So they just bought complete new equipment for every site. And the staging and testing was done centralized. There was a huge time pressure. The objective of Connexxion was to do the rollout in about 1 month. And to be honest, when they asked me, give me a plan for this rollout, I had no idea to do this, to do over 1 month, 60 sites. And Connexxion came with the idea of using university students. They had to look that we were in September and the universities weren't started yet. So at the end, what they did is they hired 7 students. And those students, they received, first of all, a training on how to do the installation, which was easy because everything was pre-installed. They received the training on how to use the software, which was also easy because the process is quite simple. And then they had to work for 1 week with the solution, scanning existing files to AVAS from the headquarters so that they had some experience. And after this training and this 1 week of working with the solution, well, those students were sent during 10 days each day to a different location as a trainer and as an installer. So in the morning, they installed the PC with the scanner and they gave some explanation to the users. In the afternoon, they supervised the usage of the users locally. So they had a lot of time to help the users if there was an issue. And this is what 6 out of 7 students were doing during 10 days. And the 7th student that they hired, the 7th student was centralized at the headquarters as a kind of support center. If the day after, when the student was left, the user had an issue, well, there was someone who we could call and who could help him without creating additional pressure on the IT department. It's a very efficient and a very effective way to do the rollout. And just as a side note, of those 7 students, after graduation, 2 were permanent hired by Connexxion. So to conclude, it was a project with a difficult start, especially defining the scope. It was not easy to find an acceptable compromise for HR, for IT, and for the users and the management. There was also a lot of time pressure. From idea to realization took almost 2 years, where Connexxion initially planned 6 months. We took the time to set the scope. We took the time to set the scope in a way that the solution was acceptable for all the users and that it did what it's supposed to do, create a secure digital HR document flow with as much as possible automation behind. And once the scope was set, yeah, the implementation was easy and just following the script. And as a cherry on the cake, the rollout and the after support, in this case, completely organized by Connexxion, was magnificent. So I would like to thank Connexxion. I know that there are some people of Connexxion present today. Thank you very much for the good relationship we have. And thank you for the fact that we are allowed to share your story. And we call Connexxion a success story. We did it together. And what's even more important for us is that you, Connexxion, you call Iris as well a success story. And these are really the kind of projects where we are going for. And with these words, I'm at the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. And if you want, you can ask questions via the chat. I will try to answer them as much as possible. Thank you very much.
Yes, Bart, thank you. We have a few questions. Let me read one. Is this solution installed on-premise or in the cloud? That's a question coming from the US. The US
okay. It's a good question. Initially, in 2016, we installed it on premises. So you remember the document flow where I had the central data center in Hilversum. That was a physical server of Connexxion. But recently we did a project to migrate it to an Azure server. So we started on-prem, we moved it to cloud, which is an Azure server maintained by Connexxion. And what was also an option, but we did it at Connexxion. There's also a cloud of Iris available. It could be an Iris cloud as well.
Another quick question. Is there a way to browse to output folders? If so, how?
Is there a way to browse to output folders? I'm sorry, can you give more details about the question?
That there is no more details on the question in the chat, but anyway, if it's unclear, we will reply to that gentleman later. Anyway, the time is up. There are some questions unanswered there, so we will get back to you guys after this presentation personally. Yes, one quick reminder. You have seen the webinar page on our website. The recording of this session, the PowerPoint that Bart presented, and the case study on our website will be published tomorrow on that web page. Let me share my screen with you rapidly to show you live what it looks like. I don't find it now, but anyway, let me share my screen like that. Yes, so there is this web page now. This is a new web page, the webinar web page on our website, irisdatacapture.com. All our scheduled webinars are listed here. So the one you just attended is this one. Next week, we have a webinar about accounts payable automation, highlight on PO matching. So please register if you didn't so far. And we have on the 3rd of June another webinar on how at Iris we deal with connections, integrations into third-party applications. And tomorrow, as I said, on this tab here, you will find the webinar we just did with the replay of the session, the PowerPoint, and the case study. I would like to thank you all for attending, and I will now close this session. Thank you all.
Thank you very much for attention. Bye.